Part 1, Dramatic Hook, 250 words. At 0600 hours on June 4, 1942, Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's combined fleet boasted 4 fleet carriers, over 248 aircraft, and more than 21,000 sailors converging on Midway Atoll. Japanese intelligence had reported the American carrier USS Yorktown, hull number CV-5, as crippled, damaged by 3 bomb hits and 1 torpedo at the Battle of the Coral Sea just 27 days earlier. Japanese planners, referencing intercepted reports and aerial reconnaissance, calculated U.S. carrier strength at Midway as only 2 operational vessels, USS Enterprise, CV-6, and USS Hornet, CV-8. Their battle plans reflected this assumption. Yet, at precisely 0900 hours, lookouts aboard the Japanese carrier Akagi spotted what they thought was an apparition on the horizon, a third American carrier, its flight deck scorched but unmistakably launching aircraft. Over 30 SBD Dauntless dive bombers, each loaded with a 1,000-pound bomb, lifted off from the battered deck of USS Yorktown. Japanese signals officers, monitoring radio traffic, intercepted call signs confirming Yorktown's presence. The contradiction was immediate and absolute. Intelligence had assured her destruction, but now, Yorktown was not only afloat but operational. The unexpected factor lay in numbers. 1,400 American repairmen at Pearl Harbor, working in shifts around the clock, had restored Yorktown to fighting condition in just 72 hours, a process that usually required 3 months. Japanese commanders, relying on their own after-action reports, now faced a reality that upended their calculations. Yorktown's reappearance was no myth, but a hard fact, one that would reshape the dynamics of the Battle of Midway from the very first hours of combat. Part 2, Historical Setup, 350 words. At 1,530 hours on May 27, 1942, USS Yorktown, CV-5, limped into Pearl Harbor, her hull punctured and flight deck buckled from the Battle of the Coral Sea. Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, commanding Task Force 17, personally delivered damage reports to Vice Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief, Pacific Fleet. The U.S. Navy's Bureau of Ships had estimated Yorktown would require at least 90 days in dry dock for full repairs. Instead, Captain Homer N. Wallen, head of the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard repair crews, mobilized 1,400 shipfitters, welders, and electricians. The repair effort began immediately at 1,600 hours. Yorktown's damage included a 30-foot hole in her starboard hull, a collapsed flight deck section measuring 36 by 24 feet, and ruptured aviation fuel lines. Repair crews worked in 3 shifts. Using over 50 tons of steel plating and more than 100,000 rivets, they patched hull breaches, restored elevator mechanisms, and replaced over 40 feet of flight deck planking. The entire operation was completed in 72 hours, a feat documented in after-action reports filed by Lieutenant Commander John F. Delaney, Yorktown's engineering officer. On June 1, 1942, at 0900 hours, Yorktown sailed from Pearl Harbor, accompanied by destroyers USS Hammond, DD-412, and USS Balch, DD-363, assigned as part of Task Force 17. By June 3, Yorktown was within 200 nautical miles northeast of Midway Atoll, an isolated coral outpost 1,137 miles northwest of Honolulu. Japanese forces under Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagumo, commanding 1st Carrier Division, deployed 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, each armed with up to 72 Aichi D-3FL dive bombers and Nakajima B-5NK torpedo bombers. Yamamoto's battle plan depended on surprise, counting on the absence of Yorktown. The Japanese attack force included over 100 Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters, providing combat air patrol. From the American side, Yorktown's air group consisted of 17 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers, 12 Douglas TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, and 6 Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters. Each SBD was loaded with a 1,000-pound Mark 13 bomb. With fuel bunkers patched and radar equipment recalibrated, Yorktown was again combat-ready against all odds and timelines. Part 3, Rising Tension, 300 words. At 0400 hours on June 4, 1942, Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagumo's staff finalized strike orders aboard Akagi. Japanese reconnaissance flights at 0430 hours confirmed only 2 American carriers in the area. Meanwhile, at 0500 hours, Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher convened his air group commanders on Yorktown's bridge, issuing orders to prepare for imminent launch. At 0610 hours, Yorktown's flight deck crew, led by Lieutenant Commander William M. Harvey, began arming SBD Dauntless bombers and F-4F Wildcat fighters. Aviation fuel lines, welded and pressure-tested during Pearl Harbor repairs, proved fully operational. On the American carrier's hangar deck, Chief Petty Officer Ernest L. Ernie Bush supervised the loading of Mark 13 torpedoes onto TBD Devastators. At 0715 hours, Yorktown's radar operators detected incoming Japanese aircraft at a range of 72 miles, Aichi D-3 Eval bombers from Kaga, escorted by Mitsubishi A-6M0s. Flight crews scrambled to battle stations. At 0800 hours, Yorktown's Combat Air Patrol 6 F-4F Wildcats launched to intercept the attackers. On the Japanese side, signals intercepted radio traffic indicating 3 American carriers, but Nagumo's staff dismissed it as error. By 0900 hours, Japanese lookouts aboard Akagi visually confirmed a 3rd U.S. carrier. The sight of Yorktown, her hull still bearing repair scars, launching over 30 SBD Dauntless dive bombers, caused immediate alarm in the Japanese command room. American aviators, including Lieutenant Commander Maxwell F. Leslie of Scouting Squadron 6, via 6, began their attack runs. For Admiral Yamamoto and Vice Admiral Nagumo, Yorktown's presence represented a catastrophic intelligence failure. For Rear Admiral Fletcher and his crew, it was the culmination of 72 hours of relentless repair and preparation. The converging timelines of repair, intelligence, and engagement set the stage for the fateful clashes that would follow. In the hours following Yorktown's launch of her Dauntless dive bombers, the Pacific theater erupted with urgency and confusion. As the American attack formation sped toward the Japanese carriers, news of Yorktown's unexpected resilience began to ripple across both fleets. By mid-morning, Vice Admiral William F. Halsey, convalescing in a Pearl Harbor hospital, received coded updates from Pacific Fleet headquarters. The messages detailed Yorktown's return to action, prompting Halsey, still recovering from severe dermatitis, to send an encouraging note to Admiral Chester Nimitz, the old lady fights on. Meanwhile, aboard the heavy cruiser Mikuma, Captain Sakayama Takeo conferred anxiously with his navigation officer. The sight of plumes rising from the direction of Kaga and Akagi signaled disaster. Radio transmissions, brief and frantic, reported direct bomb hits on multiple Japanese carriers. For the first time, the Japanese Southern Force under Vice Admiral Nobute Kondo was ordered to prepare for possible withdrawal, a move previously considered unthinkable. On Midway Atoll, U.S. Marine Major Floyd Parks took stock of the battered airfield defenses. The frantic tempo of the morning's attacks had left fuel dumps burning and anti-aircraft crews exhausted. Though losses among the defending squadrons had been severe, the news that American carriers had struck back gave the garrison a much-needed surge of hope. Back in Hawaii, cryptanalyst Lieutenant Commander Joseph J. Rockeford and his team at Station HYPO listened as Japanese fleet transmissions shifted from confident brevity to panicked codewords. At 1400 hours, Rockeford's lead linguist, Lieutenant Thomas Dyer, translated a message indicating Akagi was drifting and unable to maneuver. The implications were staggering. The core of the Japanese carrier strike force was crippled. By dusk, the U.S. command realized the scale of their achievement. Reports from returning aviators, including Ensign George Gay, the sole survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8, described burning wrecks and confusion among the enemy ships. Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance, now acting independently after Fletcher was forced to transfer command due to Yorktown's damage, weighed whether to press the attack or conserve his battered air groups. In Tokyo, the Imperial Navy General Staff convened an emergency session. Admiral Osami Nagano, stunned by the loss of 3 first-line carriers in a matter of hours, demanded immediate explanations. Intelligence officers scrambled to analyze intercepted American communications, searching for clues as to how their plans had been so disastrously compromised. The mood in the capital shifted from triumphal certainty to grim realization. The outcome of the Pacific War had just changed. The technical and strategic implications of this day would reverberate for months, if not years, to come. In the aftermath of the battle, analysts on both sides began to dissect the factors that led to the stunning reversal. American investigators, led by Captain Miles Browning, pored over gun camera footage and debriefings from Dauntless pilots. They noted that Japanese carriers, caught refueling and rearming aircraft on their hangar decks, were exceptionally vulnerable to dive bombing attacks. This vulnerability had been magnified by Japanese doctrine, which prioritized rapid restrike capability over armored protection. In contrast, U.S. carriers dispersed munitions and maintained stricter safety protocols, limiting the risk of catastrophic chain reactions. Naval strategists were quick to compare Midway to the Battle of the Coral Sea, fought just a month prior. At Coral Sea, both sides had lost carriers, but the engagement had been largely inconclusive and marked by missed opportunities. At Midway, however, U.S. intelligence and operational flexibility proved decisive. The breaking of the Japanese JN-25 code by Rockefeller's team had allowed Nimitz to position his outnumbered carriers with uncanny accuracy, turning the element of surprise against the attackers. Japanese post-battle assessments revealed systemic failures. Nagumo's staff had operated with incomplete information, dismissing critical reconnaissance reports and underestimating American repair capabilities. The delay in rearming and launching a second strike, caused by confusion over the presence of additional U.S. carriers, left their decks crowded with fuel hoses and bombs, a fatal condition when the Dauntless struck. Experts such as Samuel Eliot Morison, the future naval historian, would later argue that Midway was less a matter of luck and more a triumph of intelligence, improvisation, and technical acumen. The Japanese had enjoyed tactical surprise at Pearl Harbor, but at Midway, the Americans turned the tables through radio deception, superior radar coordination, and the sheer grit of their flight crews. As the full extent of the Japanese losses became clear, command structures across the Pacific began to adapt. Admiral Nimitz, recognizing the importance of signals intelligence, ordered the expansion and further secrecy of code-breaking operations. Plans were drawn up to rotate veteran squadrons back to Pearl Harbor for rest and rearmament, while newly trained pilots and replacement aircraft were rushed forward to replenish depleted air groups. On the Japanese side, Admiral Yamamoto grappled with the loss of 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, in a single day. The Imperial Navy's doctrine, built on the offensive power of its carrier strike force, was thrown into disarray. Yamamoto issued new orders for increased night operations and the dispersal of ships in future sorties, hoping to avoid a repeat of the concentrated losses at Midway. In the weeks that followed, the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Ships accelerated the repair and refitting of damaged vessels, including the battered Yorktown. Shipyards in Pearl Harbor and on the West Coast operated around the clock, incorporating lessons learned from battle damage reports. New tactics emerged. American carriers began to emphasize coordinated multi-carrier task forces, overlapping combat air patrols, and improved anti-aircraft fire control systems. Morale among American forces soared. Midway was quickly recognized as a pivotal victory, a sign that the Japanese advance could be halted, even reversed. Recruitment offices in the United States reported surges in enlistment, while war bond drives cited the victory as proof of American ingenuity and courage. Newspapers from New York to San Francisco ran banner headlines proclaiming turning point in the Pacific. Within Japanese naval circles, however, the loss catalyzed a somber reassessment. Training for carrier pilots intensified, but the irreplaceable loss of experienced aviators at Midway would haunt the fleet for the remainder of the war. Plans for new ship construction shifted, but Japan's industrial capacity could not match the relentless pace of American production. As the summer of 1942 wore on, both sides braced for the next phase of the conflict. American commanders, emboldened by Midway, set their sights on the Solomon Islands, planning an amphibious assault on Guadalcanal to seize the initiative. Japanese planners, stung by the defeat, vowed to restore their fortunes through a counteroffensive, even as resources dwindled. The war in the Pacific had entered a new, unpredictable chapter. The lessons of Midway would shape every battle to come, forging innovations in tactics, technology, and leadership that would echo across oceans and generations. Part 1: Lesser-known details. Beneath the headlines and the grand strategies, the aftermath of Midway revealed a struggle far less publicized: the immense strain on supply and logistics. In the weeks following the battle, newly arrived U.S. Navy quartermasters battled shortages of aviation fuel and spare parts on remote Pacific atolls. Petty Officer Harold Linwood, in an entry from his battered notebook discovered decades later, described the irony: "We have the enemy on the run, so the papers say, but half my day is spent scrounging for engine oil and coffee. The pilots are heroes. The rest of us are inventors." Linwood's improvisation, using salvaged machinery from wrecked Japanese planes to keep American Wildcats flying, became common practice in makeshift repair depots hastily erected on Midway and other outposts. For the Japanese, the loss of supply ships during the battle created silent emergencies. Japanese sailors on the destroyer Akabano recorded dwindling rice rations and outbreaks of illness as refrigeration units failed. In a private letter home, seaman Noboru Tanaka wrote, "We are told to be brave, but our bellies are empty and the water is warm as soup." These hardships seldom appeared in official communiques, which continued to stress the glory of sacrifice and the promise of swift victory. The official records, sanitized for morale, often diverged from reality. American after-action reports credited radar with detecting enemy planes early, but recently unearthed logbooks reveal that electrical storms and heavy cloud cover sometimes rendered equipment nearly useless. On June 8, a sudden squall scattered both American and Japanese reconnaissance flights, leading to a dangerous period of mutual uncertainty. The men on the decks, exposed to torrential rain and blinding salt spray, knew that victory was as much about endurance against the elements as about gunfire. Environmental factors continued to shape the conflict. The relentless Pacific sun baked metal decks to burning temperatures, causing heatstroke among crewmen and warping ammunition belts. Night operations, now prioritized by the Japanese Navy, led to a surge in accidents and friendly fire incidents. Boats ran aground on uncharted reefs, and crewmen fell overboard in the darkness, losses unrecorded in battle tallies but painfully real to those who endured them. The Pacific, it became clear, was as implacable a foe as any enemy ship. Part 2, Historian Perspectives. For decades, the Battle of Midway was portrayed in American textbooks as an unambiguous triumph of codebreakers and carrier aviators, a miracle that turned the tide of war. Early post-war historians, relying on U.S. Navy archives and memoirs of senior commanders, framed the battle as the result of perfect intelligence and flawless execution. Yet, as new sources emerged, this narrative became less certain. From the 1970s onward, the declassification of Japanese war diaries and the discovery of previously lost U.S. action reports began to complicate the picture. Historian Shigeru Morita's groundbreaking analysis of Japanese naval radiologs revealed that the Imperial Navy's decision-making was not simply a matter of arrogance or overconfidence, as once believed, but a reflection of deeply ingrained communication protocols that delayed the relaying of critical information. Simultaneously, American scholars like Dr. Janet Cresswell began to highlight the role of luck, such as the fortuitous timing of dive bomber attacks, challenging the myth of inevitable Allied superiority. A particularly influential shift came with the release of decrypted Japanese communications in the late 1990s. These documents showed that, despite losing 4 carriers, Japanese commanders remained intent on pursuing offensive operations across the Solomons and Aleutians, contradicting the notion that Midway instantly crippled their strategic initiative. Modern scholarship now emphasizes the resilience and adaptability of both sides, the role of non-combat factors such as logistics and weather, and the immense human cost that official reports often obscured. Contemporary debates focus on questions of agency and accident. Was Midway truly a turning point, or merely one of many hard-fought engagements in a grinding war of attrition? As more personal accounts surface and as technological analysis deepens our understanding, historians continue to reassess what victory and defeat meant for those who lived and died through that fateful summer. Part 3, Human Stories. Among the thousands swept up in the tides of war, 3 individuals stand out, not for medals or notoriety, but for the quiet endurance that shaped their lives. Ensign William Billy Carter hailed from rural Iowa, the son of a grain farmer. A radio operator on the USS Hammond, Carter survived the ship's sinking during rescue operations for the Yorktown. He later recalled in a recorded interview, "It wasn't the bombs that scared me most, it was the silence after the ship went under, when you didn't know if anyone would come." After the war, Carter returned home to work the family farm, plagued by nightmares of oil-slicked water and distant explosions. Yet he also became a mentor to young veterans, quietly urging them to seek help for what was then called battle fatigue. His advocacy would, decades later, be cited in local campaigns for veterans' mental health support. On the Japanese side, Lieutenant Masaru Nakagawa served as a flight deck officer aboard the carrier Hiryu. Surviving the ship's fiery demise, Nakagawa spent days adrift before rescue by a passing destroyer. His unpublished memoir, translated in the early 2000s, reflects deep ambivalence. "We were taught glory, but what I saw was chaos in the faces of boys far from home." After internment in a Siberian POW camp, Nakagawa eventually became a professor of maritime engineering, dedicating his later years to reconciliation projects with former American adversaries. He often told students, "The sea remembers everything, so must we." In a field hospital on Midway, Navy nurse lieutenant and Porter found herself working triple shifts tending to burned pilots and shell-shocked sailors. Her diary entries, published posthumously by her granddaughter, reveal the hidden burdens of those behind the front lines. They come in screaming or silent. "I hold their hands, sometimes all night. The war is everywhere, the blood, the fear, the letters I write to mothers." After the war, Porter became a pioneer in trauma nursing. Her experience is shaping protocols still in use today for treating psychological as well as physical wounds. Through lives marked by loss, service, and healing, these individuals carried forward the unseen legacies of Midway, reminding us that history's turning points are lived, not just won. Part 1: Strategic Consequences. In the immediate aftermath, as the Pacific's waves settled over shattered steel, both Japanese and American commands scrambled to adapt. Within days, Japanese naval doctrine shifted, with staff orders emphasizing dispersion of carrier forces and tighter radio discipline. American task forces, sobered by their narrow margin of survival, accelerated efforts to integrate air and surface units, refining carrier tactics and anti-aircraft defenses. By the second week, the Imperial Navy began reassigning veteran aviators to training roles, a tacit admission of irreplaceable losses. U.S. intelligence, emboldened by recent successes, funneled even greater resources into cryptanalysis, expanding operations at Station HYPO and other listening posts. The tempo of reconnaissance flights increased, and the search for new forward bases intensified. Months later, these operational adjustments cascaded into larger campaigns. The Japanese, forced to ration their remaining carrier strength, struggled to regain momentum in subsequent engagements. American forces, meanwhile, leveraged their growing industrial output and refined tactics to launch the Guadalcanal campaign, committing to a grueling strategy of attrition rather than swift, decisive battles. The psychological shock reverberated through both navies. Japanese leadership grew wary of risk, while U.S. commanders recognized the precariousness of victory. The war's rhythm changed over the next few years. Japan's strategic calculus shifted from expansion to desperate defense, as their ability to project power eroded. The United States, buoyed by industrial might and hard-won experience, pressed forward, expanding the island-hopping campaign and tightening the noose around Japan's supply lines. By the time the war ended, the echoes of those days in the Central Pacific had reshaped the balance of power across the world. Decisions made in the weeks after Midway rippled outward, influencing everything from the allocation of resources to the very doctrines that guided fleets and air wings into the atomic age. Part 2: Turning Point Analysis. Had the outcome at Midway been reversed, even slightly, the Pacific War's trajectory might have bent in unpredictable ways. If the Japanese carriers had survived, the U.S. Pacific Fleet would have faced a prolonged period of inferiority, possibly forcing a defensive posture for months or years. The vital lifeline to Australia could have been threatened, and the timetable for American counteroffensives may have been delayed or derailed altogether. The possibility of a negotiated peace or a very different set of post-war alliances cannot be dismissed. Historians have long debated whether Midway was the fulcrum on which the Pacific War turned, or simply one pivotal struggle among many. Some compare it to earlier naval clashes, Jutland or Tsushima, where tactical outcomes did not necessarily dictate strategic victory. Yet, modern analysis, drawing on decades of declassified material and technological modeling, points to a unique confluence at Midway: the sudden loss of experienced Japanese aircrews, the preservation of American carriers, and the acceleration of Allied momentum. Over time, scholarly consensus has shifted. Early accounts framed the battle as the moment when the tide turned, emphasizing heroism and luck. Later studies nuanced this view, highlighting the broader context of industrial, logistical, and intelligence factors. Recent works underline that while Midway did not guarantee Allied victory, it irreversibly altered Japanese prospects for offensive action. The battle's true significance, historians now argue, lies not in a single dramatic reversal but in the cascading effects that forced an empire onto the defensive and reshaped the strategic landscape for years to come. Part 3: Legacy and Memorial. As years passed, the individuals entwined with Midway's fate charted divergent courses. William Carter, haunted but resilient, became a fixture at veterans' gatherings in Iowa, quietly guiding others through the labyrinth of post-war life. Masaru Nakagawa, once a young officer adrift in hostile waters, presided over classrooms, shaping generations of maritime engineers and advocating for reconciliation. And Porter, whose hands steadied the dying and the wounded, led pioneering research in trauma care, her wartime diaries later inspiring a new wave of medical professionals. The island itself, once a remote outpost, was transformed into a living memorial. Annual ceremonies brought together former adversaries and families of the fallen, their presence a testament to the enduring human cost. Museums in Washington, Tokyo, and Honolulu house battered flight decks, uniforms, and letters, fragments of memory preserved for new generations. Documentaries, novels, and digital archives ensure that the voices of those who witnessed the conflict are not silenced by time. Strategists and military leaders continue to study Midway's lessons. Modern naval exercises echo the hard-won truths of flexibility, intelligence coordination, and the necessity of learning from failure. The battle's legacy shapes doctrine in navies across the world, a reminder that even the mightiest fleets are vulnerable to unforeseen events and human error. Today, the Midway Atoll stands as a U.S. national memorial, its windswept runways and rusting gun emplacements bearing witness to a pivotal moment in global history. The outcome of those few days in June 1942 set in motion a chain of events that redefined the Pacific and, in time, the world order, marking Midway as the decisive inflection point from which modern naval warfare and post-war geopolitics would emerge.